Welcome. I'm Annie Wright. I'm a licensed psychotherapist and a trauma clinician with a specialty in relational trauma recovery. I'm also the founder of a boutique trauma-informed therapy center located in Berkeley, California, that's serving clients all over California and Florida. In addition to this, I'm also an online course creator and a published mental health writer, with my pieces and opinions appearing in Forbes, Business Insider, NBC, and the Huffington Post, among others. Every bit of my work in the world, whether this is through my clinical work, through my online courses, or through content like this that I put out into the world, is designed to support those who come from childhood trauma backgrounds to have the best adulthood possible despite adverse early beginnings. I'm so glad to connect with you, and I hope that what I share here can be of support to you. And very importantly, please remember, no matter where you're starting from, change is possible. With that in mind, let's begin this journey together by exploring today's topic. Was my childhood really that bad? In my 13 years as a therapist, this is without a doubt one of the most frequent questions and comments I've heard and still hear. Sometimes I hear this question in the context of it being the very thing people ask themselves about for years before finally coming in to see me as a therapist. And sometimes, even as we begin working together, it's still a question that surfaces because it's still on my clients' minds, even as they've engaged in weekly therapy with me as a relational trauma therapist. It's a question that ping-pongs as denial ebbs, numbness fades, and the dawning consciousness of reality, of what really happened and the impact it left, wars with the conflicting ideas about what childhood trauma is and isn't, love and loyalty to parents despite their deficits, and contradictory awarenesses of what was and what isn't. It's a question that's central to relational trauma recovery, to childhood trauma recovery. It's a question that must be asked, must be confronted in order to support the healing process. But it's a very difficult and almost inevitably painful question to grapple with. As a trauma therapist, as a relational trauma recovery specialist, here are a few key points. First, remember, the answer to whether or not you had a bad childhood is subjective and yours alone. It's an answer entirely dependent on your own feelings, emotions, and opinions, not the feelings, emotions, and opinions of your parents or guardians, not the feelings, emotions, and opinions of your siblings, community members, church members, or the internet. No one gets to ask and answer this question besides you and you alone. That's the beautiful and also the very hard thing. Why is this? The way we remember and feel about our childhood is deeply personal and unique, much like a tapestry of memories woven with our individual emotions and experiences. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, a renowned trauma expert, beautifully captures this concept in his book, The Body Keeps the Score. I'll link to that book in the show notes. In his book, he illustrates how our personal emotional responses and the way we process events internally play a significant role in shaping our childhood memories. It's like each of us has a different lens through which we view our past, and it's these personal lenses that give color and meaning to our childhood experiences. This understanding is so important because it reminds us that it's normal and natural if our view of our childhood doesn't quite match up with someone else's. It's a subjective experience. So when we talk about childhood, it's not just about what happened. It's about how we hold those experiences in our heart and mind subjectively. And yet, when it comes to what makes a childhood quote unquote bad, the what behind the making has both objective data and subjective nuance. Let me explain. What makes a childhood bad has both objective data and subjective nuance. For example, research on society's views of what constitutes a quote unquote bad childhood experience often centers around the concept of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs for short. The Kaiser Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, the ACEs study, was a significant investigation into childhood abuse, neglect, and household challenges, and provides an objective framework for most clinicians and social researchers to identify negative experiences in childhood. I'll include a link to this study in the show notes. This landmark study, spanning 1995 to 1997, revealed that almost 2/3 of participants reported at least one ACE score, with over 20% reporting 3 or more ACE scores. The research underscored a graded dose-response relationship between ACEs and negative health and well-being outcomes. In other words, the more ACEs experience, the greater the risk for negative outcomes. If you're curious about the Kaiser ACEs quiz and what your score yourself may be, you can take it from the link in the show notes. Without a doubt, the ACE framework has been pivotal in understanding how different forms of abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction during childhood can lead to long-term negative outcomes. But the scope of the quiz fails to account for all experiences. I mean, of course, how could one quiz do that? For example, what happens when a female is the abuser in those scenarios versus the man? Or what happens when one isn't sure if a parent or guardian had mental illness at play, as suggested in the quiz? Or what happens in broader social settings and outside the family home, like in the cases of chronic bullying in middle school, coercion by faith and spiritual communities, or aggression or belittling from teachers or coaches, etc.? The Kaiser ACEs study focuses on adversities within the home and sometimes overlooks broader factors that also impact quote unquote bad childhood experiences. Indeed, the concept of embodiment proposed by epidemiologist Nancy Krieger emphasizes that human biology is shaped by both the material and the social world, suggesting that the adverse experiences extend beyond just family environments to include wider societal factors. If you're curious about this research, I'll include a link to it in the show notes too. So, in my opinion, as a trauma therapist, what could these broader factors look like? Well, this could look like racial and ethnic discrimination, gender-based discrimination, and community violence, for just a few examples. These kinds of experiences can't be discounted when inventorying the functionality or dysfunctionality of a childhood, how quote unquote good or quote unquote bad it was. But look, despite these limitations, the ACE framework remains a key and frankly objective tool in identifying children at risk and guiding interventions and public health measures. And very importantly, beyond these objective measures, once again, the subjective interpretation of one's childhood plays a crucial role in determining if one's childhood experiences were quote unquote bad. The perception of whether a childhood was quote unquote bad is deeply personal and is influenced by individual experiences and emotional responses. For instance, you may have one or more ACEs, what society would deem objective markers of hard and quote unquote bad experiences, such as housing insecurity at times in your childhood. But perhaps you also had deeply loving, secure, and attuned parents throughout your childhood. That kind of protective factor is what's known as a positive childhood experience, or PCE for short. PCEs highlight the significance of supportive relationships and resilience building in mitigating the effects of adverse experiences, or even how and if someone perceives their objective, quote unquote, bad childhood experience as such. This growing body of research on PCEs, which I'll share more about in coming recordings, underscores the complexity of childhood experiences, demonstrating that someone can have quote unquote objective bad experiences in their childhood, but may not necessarily view them as such because of other protective childhood experiences that were at play. So, all of this to say, your childhood can be both and doesn't have to be either or. When reflecting on whether one's childhood was quote unquote really that bad, It's important to recognize that the answer can encompass both positive and negative aspects rather than being a simple either or situation. It's entirely possible to hold compassion for your parents and recognize the challenges they faced, including the damaging social forces that influenced their actions and decisions at that time. Forces like sexism, racism, classism, etc. The reality is that the majority of parents do work hard to provide for and protect their children, doing the best they can within their own limitations and the constraints of their circumstances in the country and age of history they are raising them in. At the same time, it's also vital and valid to acknowledge the impact of their limitations on your development and well being. For example, your mom worked 80 to 90 hours a week and was emotionally exhausted when you saw her and not really able to support you emotionally, but still provided for the rent and groceries. It was a both and experience. She did the best she could to provide for you and protect you, and yet couldn't be there for you in other ways. Or being around your dad felt like walking on eggshells when it came to his anxiety and anger, but you know he had complex PTSD from his own egregiously physically abusive childhood. It was a both and experience. He didn't hit you like his father did to him, but still his unprocessed trauma impacted you and your sense of comfort and safety in the home. You get the idea from these examples. This dual recognition of both the positive intent and the negative impact of our parents and guardians is a form of accepting contradictory thinking, where one can appreciate the good while also acknowledging the harm or limitation. So often, the challenge in accepting the duality of experiences prevents us from asking and consciously answering the question, was my childhood really that bad? So, if we can learn to hold both and versus considering it an either or situation, we may support ourselves in critically examining our personal histories more thoughtfully. But that, of course, leads to the question, why even bother asking the question, was my childhood really that bad? Why is it even important to ask the question? What's the point of blaming my parents? I know they did the best they could. All therapists just want to talk about childhood and blame parents, don't they? I don't want to get stuck navel gazing. It's so self indulgent to ask this question. I don't want to get stuck in the past. I want to move forward. These are all iterations of comments I've heard from therapy clients, my online course students, and consumers of my work over the years. And to each of these points, I would answer the following. It's important to ask the question, was my childhood really that bad? To support your overall biological, psychological, and social healing. Not to blame your parents, not to stay stuck in the past, not to be self indulgent, but because when we can honestly confront the truth of our lives and see things more plainly, how we formed in relationship to our past, we can get ourselves the right kind of help to recover and heal from it. And why is recovering and healing so important if we've had a quote unquote bad childhood? Understanding and confronting one's history of childhood trauma, particularly for those with high adverse childhood experiences scores, those ACE scores I was talking about, it's a crucial step towards holistic health and well-being in your adulthood. The connection between high ACE scores and physical health is profound. Research indicates a marked increase in the risk of serious health conditions like cancer and heart diseases among individuals with high ACE scores. I'll include a link to this research in the show notes. This link is often attributed to the long-term effects of stress hormones, which, when persistently activated, can cause various chronic health issues. Indeed, the Cleveland Clinic provides valuable insights into how stress impacts the body, emphasizing the importance of addressing these early life experiences. I'll include a link to this research also in the show notes. Mental health, too, is, as you probably know, deeply influenced by childhood trauma. The original ACE study, along with subsequent research, has established a clear link between the number of ACEs and the severity of mental health disorders. Again, I'll include a link to this research in the show notes. Research has also shown a strong relationship between adverse childhood experiences with difficulties in adult relationship formation. Again, I'll include a link to this research in the show notes so you can read more about it. So you can see addressing and healing from childhood trauma is vital, not just for your physical health and for your mental health, but also for your ability to form secure, healthy, functional relationships as an adult. So at this point, you might be asking yourself, what options are available if you conclude your childhood was quote unquote bad? If you've asked yourself this question and come to the conclusion that, in fact, your childhood was quote unquote bad, that you, in fact, come from a childhood trauma history, you may be asking yourself or saying to yourself, okay, so what next? Now that I know, what do I do? How do I get better? The answer, in 2 words, trauma therapy. Specifically, and with more context, it's important for you to know that evidence based therapies like EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, can be a truly wonderful resource. EMDR has been shown to be particularly effective in easing the distress associated with traumatic childhood memories, with studies indicating its efficacy in reducing PTSD symptoms and improving overall mental health. I'll include a link to this research too in the show notes. If you're curious about how you can find an EMDR therapist for yourself and or how you and I can work together directly, I'll include information about that in the show notes too. And if you already have a therapist, but you'd like to work with me in some capacity, please explore my online courses devoted to relational trauma recovery. I'll put information about that in the show notes. And finally, if you're still not sure what I shared today applies to you, if you're still not sure if your childhood was really that bad, I would invite you to take my signature quiz. Do I come from a relational trauma background? It's a 5-minute, 25-question quiz I created that can be incredibly illuminating and will point you in the direction of a wide variety of resources that can be of further support to you. I'll include the link to that quiz in the show notes as well. Plus, when you take the quiz, you'll be added to my mailing list where you'll receive twice-a-month letters from me sharing original high-quality essays with accompanying YouTube videos and audios you can stream, devoted to the topic of relational trauma recovery, and where I share more about me as a person, my life, and how I'm journeying through my own relational trauma recovery journey and general adulthood. My newsletters are the only place where I share intimate glimpses into my life, including photos, the resources that are supporting me, the things I've discovered that are nourishing me, that delight me, words that uplift me, the practices that support me, etc. So please be sure to sign up for my mailing list, whether or not you want to take the quiz, as it's the best way to be in touch with me and hear all the things I only share with my newsletter subscribers. I'll include a link to the newsletter in the show notes too. Thank you so much for watching. I truly hope that even a small part of what I shared today felt helpful to you. If you found value in this video and would like to stay connected with my latest content, please consider giving the video a like. It helps more than you know. Also, subscribing to my channel and turning on the notification bell ensures you're always up to date with my newest videos. I appreciate your support and look forward to continuing this journey with you. So thank you. And until next time, please take such good care of yourself. You're so worth it.